Hey everyone, welcome to You Said What, where we look at the most memorable conversations and written interchanges in our lives. First off, I want to thank our sponsor, Pioneering Collective, an executive thought leadership firm combining personal PR, coaching, and networking to transform hard-earned wisdom into heavyweight impact. You can learn more at pioneeringcollective.com. Today's guest is Wema Hoover. Wema has been a DE&I leader for more than a decade at big companies like Pfizer and Sanofi and Google. Often, she finds herself reacting to microaggressions that have happened to other people. On this episode, she tells the story of one that she was on the receiving end of and what she did when a male coworker she barely knew came up and started touching her hair in the company cafeteria in Paris. Hope you enjoy the conversation. Hi, Wema. Great to see you.
Hi, Ernie. Pleasure to be here with you today.
You've been in the DE&I space for a decade plus now, which makes you eminence grise. And I want to start by talking to you a little bit about your experience there and where you see the current landscape. Give me sort of the state of play with DE&I, not to oversimplify it, but do we generally have agreement about these principles as you talk to people and you work with organizations and other leaders? And we're really just discussing and raising questions about how best to get there, or are we still debating the principles?
Yeah, that's a great question, Ernie. I think right now the question has been answered. Not only do we need to get there, we need to have it. We need to make it come to life. We need to weave it into the fabric of how we operate from a professional, a corporate, a reputation, a social responsibility, and a fiscal standpoint. And that has come about because of all of the significant social issues that we have experienced over the last 2 years with Black Lives Matter, with the violence against Blacks, with the violence against Asians, xenophobia, LGBT exclusion. All of this has come to a point where it is acknowledged that we no longer can separate what is happening socially outside the doors of your organization with the people inside. Those folks are now becoming activists, and they're the ones that want to see change and want to see organizations truly live their mission and vision.
And so if we all agree on that, where's the progress yet to be made when you talk about weaving it into the fabric? What's on the to-do list?
Well, that is the conundrum, because there is that desire and there's truly that ambition, but there is that lack of practicality and pragmatism around, now, how do we make not only it stick, but how do we make it operational? And operational, so it's a part of our culture. And that's where the real work has to be done. That it's beyond a hiring quota, that it's beyond bringing in a diverse board member, that it's beyond actually having diversity training, but it's truly at the heart in a belief that having people with differences of experience, of backgrounds, of perspective, of cultural experience is actually going to expand and make the work, make the culture, and make the environment much more enriching, collaborative, and innovative.
Is there a playbook here? Is anybody doing this? Not just how many people did you hire, how many training programs did you have, but who actually really have it deeply embedded into the organization, into the culture? Do you see examples of that?
That's a great question. And quite frankly, the best they establish is as an integrated practice. It's hard to say who does it well because every organization is different from their behaviors, from the culture, from what is touted and modeled from leadership. And the ones that truly have a desire to have it integrated and reflected in all of that they do are the ones that are seeing the most momentum and having the most progress, because they don't separate diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging from their leadership capabilities, from their performance management and operational expectations, from how they do their strat planning and looking at how they're going out to their customers or market and making sure they connect with the diversity of their constituents. So the ones that are doing that well have that integrated and focused approach.
So for those places that do it well, it's just part of every single decision, conversation. It's a consideration with everything they do.
Absolutely. It goes beyond a campaign. It goes beyond an event. And it goes beyond just the dog and pony show, where you have a month, you have celebration, but those monumental moments, which are important and are critical, are just reinforcing what employees feel every day.
As a Black leader, what are the biggest changes that you have seen over this decade in your career and working in this space, either positive or negative, as you look back on the arc of the decade? What stands out at you as being different?
What stands out as being different, and quite frankly, which keeps me encouraged, is just the global nature of how organizations and really the world that we live in is. So we have released and really eliminated the divide in terms of information, technology, who your customers are, who your patients are. And what that has done is has made a necessity to get people who reflect your customer bases that may not be the ones who live in your backyard or your next door neighbor or have gone to the same college with you. So it has forced organizations to look at their prototype of leadership, their prototype of employees, and expand what that framework is. And having to be open to different styles of leadership, different approaches, recognizing that people who sit in different countries and different regions of our world have different experience and need to be connected to in a different way. So that's what excites me. That is truly a business imperative. And you see organizations really focused on it. What I think is the greatest work that needs to be done is ensuring that when we do hire and bring those individuals that have different cultural backgrounds or different genders or different life experiences, that there is a environment for them to be successful. That you just don't bring them in and then let them fall because of the conditions.
The hiring is just the first step.
Exactly. Creating that scaffolding, that environment for them to be successful.
Yeah. I was having a conversation the other day with another leader about this, who works in the intersection of design and inclusivity. And she was talking about how so many organizations think of inclusivity as a cultural issue, not as a business issue. And she's on a mission to show them that it's a business issue. And it sounds like you're saying the same thing, that there's that disconnect now. Not enough companies see this as a market share issue. Yes, it's a cultural issue, but it's not just that.
Absolutely. And whether they see it or not, it is. So the ones who are aware of it, because they can acknowledge or they can't, but it absolutely is a business issue and a business imperative. And the companies that recognize that are the ones that are harnessing and really getting the value and maximizing their approach to diversity to really build their internal performance and connectivity and engagement in their organizations.
What surprises you the most as you have DEI-related conversations with leaders and organizations in terms of either things that they don't get or things that they do understand or something totally different?
What surprises me the most, but what I also have to keep telling myself is that's why I'm here, and this is the work that I do, is really the lack of connectivity they have to the real world sometimes. Really living in and actually surrounding themselves in very homogenous environments that they literally only come in contact with people who have their same life experience, background. And so even in their heart, when they want to do good, and I can tell you 99% of the leaders and people want to show up, want to do good, have the genuine sincerity, but they literally don't have the frame of reference, the experience with others to know what to do. They, have a very siloed view because that is what their world has been. So that surprises me so much when I think about the youth right now having access, and TikToks or people at all corners of the globe do the same TikTok dance, which still blows my mind, how they are so well connected. And some of the leaders are still living in a very myopic, very closed world.
Is that a generational thing? Like, are we talking here about people who didn't grow up with TikTok, who are living in a bubble, as opposed to 20-somethings that you meet or teenagers that you meet who live in a different kind of world? Do you see that difference, or is it really just an individual thing?
I think it's the latter. I think it's based on the individual. And I think it's also based on their comfort level and what has been reared in terms of their life, their values, their communities that they're in, the associations that they're part of, the people that they connect with and have a desire. I think it's your natural affinity. So I think it's the latter. However, I do recognize that most of the leaders see that they have to change. Not that it's nice to have and I just want to know the right words to say at the next town hall. They understand that it is something that is imperative for them to make meaning of what's going on in the world and how do I show up in it in these times. And again, it really shows the value of the work that I do and other diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging practitioners such as myself.
Yeah, that's inspiring. That's where the conversation's going. Let's talk about your communications moment. The one that we've talked about happened when you were living in Paris and working for Sanofi, the pharma giant. Tell me about it.
Yeah, so I want to preface by saying that this experience was just one that I hold no malice against. It just happened, but it was one that always sticks out in my mind just because it was an example of when I was a case study for the work that I was doing, leading diversity, equity, inclusion. And I was in the cafeteria having lunch, had my hair in braids. Just to give context, it wasn't a very diverse organization because it was at headquarters. And so majority men, majority white men, very few women, and almost, I would say, zero women of color. So I was usually the only woman of color. And I was in the cafeteria and getting coffee, and a gentleman in the middle of this conversation, having a conversation with four other people, colleagues, stopped, turned, pulled my hair, touched it, and said, "Oh, this is very interesting. How did you do that? How long did it take?" And at that moment, not only did all of the people that he was talking with stop and stare at me, but the other folks that were online for coffee also stopped just to lean in to hear my response. And so it almost had like an amplifying effect. And so I immediately had this gut-wrenching feeling like, wow, this feels uncomfortable. And why would this man first touch my person and secondly, stop what he's doing to ask me that in front of everyone? And I said, "Oh, probably the same amount of time it takes you to cut your hair." And I laughed it off. And I walked away. And I did that on purpose because I wanted to minimize the situation. I did not want to be the person being stared upon by everyone because they're curious, because there's no one who looks like me or has the texture of hair I have. So I took the decision to stop, laugh it off, and walk away. I did later talk to the gentleman and shared how I felt. "You singled me out. I don't know you. I've never had lunch or met you." But in that moment, I felt very excluded, and I felt that my difference was really put on display, and not only put on display, but it was signified. It made me feel like I didn't belong, and it made me feel that everyone else was looking at and wanting to know what it was. How is she going to answer? And they also had questions of confusion, like, why is somebody touching somebody else's hair, which I didn't address in that moment. And I said that made me feel very uncomfortable. And if you truly want to understand and have that, whether you maybe have a neighbor that you're just curious, I would appreciate in the future you pull me aside. I walked past you in the hall, said greetings on the elevator, have not worked with you. But if you truly want to know, I would be more than willing to speak with you. But I felt very excluded and
Singled
really felt that,
too, right?
singled out in my different, because I was different. Right. And he understood, but that was a moment that stuck out to me because I realized in my work as a head of global diversity, equity, inclusion, that what inclusion and exclusion feels like. And those little microaggressions are the ones that can have a huge impact on someone's feeling that they belong, that what the standard of norm, they can show up as their authentic selves, and that others are empathetic and pause to think about another person's experience. And I knew in that moment what work had to be done because I experienced a lot of myself.
And what did he say when you talked to him, when you pulled him aside and told him you didn't?
He apologized and said he was just curious. He reflected and said, looking back, I can see how that was inappropriate. He said in that moment, because, as I mentioned, there were no women of color, that he just had ultimate curiosity and he just felt the need to stop. But he also admitted it probably was weird to do it then at that moment, and he apologized, and I appreciated that. But I had to explain to him is that a difference from being curious, right, having curiosity and really wanting to connect with someone, than making someone feel as a spectacle or different and being looked upon because of your difference. And that was where it did not feel good. And that is not what we were actually promoting and really trying to change in terms of the inclusive work environment we were establishing. So I had to literally break it down, share my experiences, but also share your lack of thoughtfulness, your lack of stopping and pausing and having awareness and saying, okay, let me think about this for a moment. I'm just curious, but is that an appropriate moment to do? And would you do that with anyone else with a difference? Would you, touch someone who has a wheelchair just to have a point where you stop and really have empathy and understanding for someone else's experience?
It's an interesting story because it's the kind of thing where even if it was a white woman, that touching someone's hair is not usually that acceptable. If you don't know someone, it's a pretty strange behavior.
I felt exactly the same way. And that was why I was perplexed. And in that moment, I knew that I could not engage because there was something there. What I shared with the gentleman, I was like, there is a difference between trying to communicate and connect with someone with the intent to connect and discover, right? I appreciate that. If anyone does that and wants to know about my hair, what I eat, what I cook, the lotions I wear, these are all things that my colleagues have asked me, but they've asked me in a very welcoming, a very kind environment because they just wanted to know. And without touching me. What was the most perplexing is when you were literally engaged in another discussion, you stopped. And that's when, again, the feeling of being a spectacle
right,
and being singled out because of my difference really hit hard and made me feel like I didn't belong and made me feel that, was this a person that felt a sense of power or privilege? But in any event, I made the decision to downplay it and not actually elevate it, escalate it any further by having a big reaction, but definitely pulling him aside and sharing, hey, and by the way, I'm the head of diversity, equity, inclusion.
His jaw must have dropped when he heard that.
Oh yeah. But I must say, Ernie, it was a good exchange. And I do feel like there was sincerity in our discussion and his desire to understand. And maybe this was cultural because, quite frankly, we were right in the 8th arrondissement in headquarters. So it was a very homogenous community. So I can't say there was a lot of diversity to begin with. But more importantly, as an individual and knowing that I'm working in an organization, there should have been something, a pause, a moment of self-awareness, of even emotional intelligence that says, wow, I feel that and I'm curious, but you know what? Maybe I'll see if I see this, I'm having coffee or in the elevator or in the morning passing and I'll ask her that, not doing it and making the center of attention.
One thing that's impressive is that you turned it into a real teachable moment for him. You could have been so taken aback that you screamed or shouted or made him a spectacle, which would have been understandable, but you didn't. You kind of calmly reacted, moved away, made a joke, moved out of it, and then circled back later and talked to him about how you felt and had an honest, real, genuine exchange with him so that he could learn what was going on. How do you decide what are the right occasions for teachable moments? And then what are the occasions where certain things are so offensive that they demand something more than that? Because there's all kinds of gradations. You handle that really calmly, but are there situations that you've been in or do you have in your mind where it would be above and beyond and it's not the kind of thing you could just pull them aside and just keep it between the two of you, that it would need to be escalated?
Yes, absolutely. So I'll say two things. One, it was a professional environment. And I think in an environment where you understand and know the company's values, their vision, the behaviors, you have to really lead with good intent, right? You have to assume good intent. So that was what I chose to do in that moment, just because we were in the organization and it has a great culture, has good people. So I made a decision to assume good intent. And that's why I engaged that way. And also the other interesting thing is that I was a foreigner living in a foreign country, speaking a foreign language. And so I myself had probably had these microaggressions against other people unknowingly, not greeting the store owner or the proprietor, not saying hello in French could be seen as extremely rude and disrespectful. And I had to learn. I had to have those store owners, those proprietors have enough sensibilities to assume my good intent and the fact that I was not from the country to educate and share with me. And so I was faced with that over and over again, having moved to France. So I gave that deference out to other people because I know I had did it unintentionally. And so that allowed me to really react in that moment and other moments because I assumed good intent and I had been the benefactor of other people's assuming my good intent and doing that. But certainly there are other times when it's more egregious. And also it may be systemic of what the organization or the company tolerates that is perpetuated by
there's a bigger problem condition. There.
Absolutely. Those incidents and those examples absolutely need to be reported.
Have you, in the course of your leadership life, been involved in all kinds of, let's call them microaggressions, all the way up to more serious things? Have you seen a lot of that kind of stuff? Not necessarily directed at you, but just been around a lot of things where one has to parse them as either this or that or a degree of seriousness?
Yes, I have. And what I would say is, again, 99% of the time, it is someone's, and I'm not condoning anyone's behavior, but it is something that is done by the person that just has a lack of diversity in their life, in their experience, in their relationships. You do have those that may be malicious and may do things because of obviously underlying value systems and things, but that is, I would say that's more rare. But that's where you have to have an organization, opportunities for people to share confidentially, have channels of communication where they can give feedback, whether it's a pulse survey, whether it is an ombudsman, corporate ombudsman, whether it is, their manager or HR, that they can actually share without fear of any type of retaliation what their experience. Because if you leave those open and truly give a platform for employees to share their experiences with the intent to improve behavior, improve management connectivity and the management practices, what you'll get, it will be so much rich information, real experiences that people face that management and leadership will never know because they're so far removed. You want that very frontline experience that is one-on-one because quite frankly, they don't leave jobs, they leave managers. And I truly believe that. And if you know and understand that there is something pervasive around your manager populations and your leader population, you can actually change that. You can build in systems and interventions that can examine them, can actually promote better behaviors, can show examples of that. But to the opposite end of the coin, you have to be willing to listen.
You mentioned just a couple of minutes ago that when you were living in Paris, you were probably offending some of their sensibilities unknowingly with things that you were doing. Did anyone ever, either there or in your previous life before Paris, has anyone pulled you aside and said, you know what, Wema, like what you're doing with X is offending me or it's not making me feel good? Like, have you been on the receiving end of that kind of feedback too?
Yes, absolutely. I remember about a year and a half ago, I was working with a project team I had that was working for me. And this was about a group of 100 people. And on the call, I kept referring to my team as you guys. And I had a small group subset of the team make a meeting and said, it's very offensive when you said you guys. I am a non-binary person and I go by, they, them, theirs. And would appreciate if you said you all, you folks. First, I felt horrible because I should know better. However, it is something that has been so programmed, right? Like the implicit association that anytime you address a big group, you use a male pronoun.
Right.
And I have worked very hard to address that. But in that moment, I was having so much fun. We really had great exchange that I was excited. I went back to the programming that I had internally. And I showed up this way, but I was very grateful for the group of my team that just pull me aside and say, hey, this is how it made me feel. Please be mindful because you are the leader. When you say that, it actually encourages others not to be as mindful. And I was very thankful for that. So to that question, Ernie, when you're able to receive it and understand that you yourself have these blind spots, you yourself have these tendencies that may come off as a microaggression or micro-inequity, and you're willing to receive and change, you're able to give that to other people.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, the education and the feedback with the right kind of setting seems so important to progress. Thank you so much, Wema, for coming on the show and talking and helping us learn more about your life and DEI, where it stands, and your great communications moment.
Ernie, this has been a great discussion, and I appreciate the opportunity to share these moments with you.
We all have ideas about what people should do in this moment or in that situation, but you learn a lot about a person by how they actually react when those imagined scenarios become real. With her coworker in the cafeteria, Wema resisted the temptation to assume bad intent. She treated it like it was an honest mistake, and then she talked to him quietly, one-on-one, rather than blowing up at him. What a great model for helping to educate someone. Thanks for listening to this episode of You Said What, and I'll see you next week.